Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm excited to share the process of creating Eldric, the Storyteller, a whimsical gnome illustration brought to life with layers of Caran Luminance colored pencils over a graphite base. In this high-speed tutorial, I'll walk you through my techniques from sketching the initial lines to building depth and color. So, as you can see, we're getting started already on the graphite drawing. And before we dive in, if you love art tutorials and whimsical illustrations like this one, be sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Also, feel free to drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts as we bring Eldric to life. I begin this piece with a basic outline using graphite pencils on Stonehenge paper, just starting with light, loose lines, and that helps me map out the proportions and expression of Eldric. Making sure his eyes convey both warmth and wisdom, and it's just pretty much getting all the lines in place, the perspective, his gesture, his expression. And once the sketch felt right, I just continued to refine a little bit more and then started adding some colored pencils in. And this is just light layers of Caran Luminance colored pencils. And for the base, I always apply really light pressure to allow the following layers to blend smoothly, and Eldric's robe and hat needed a rich muted palette to capture that vintage storytelling vibe, and these are going to be like warm earth tones, so you're seeing some of the basic orange and browns will be going into part of his robe, and part of his jacket is also going to be having just some green natural earth colors. And he's a cheerful, jolly gnome. He loves telling his stories, and here you can just see his expression. And I'm continuing to add on these colored pencils, very light layers. You don't want to saturate the paper immediately. Really light layers and many different colors. There will be several that will be placed into his hat. I generally, on colored pencils, work from the lightest areas to the darkest. Once you've placed something darker than you may have intended, it's very difficult to ever lighten that significantly. So try to preserve your lightest areas. His beard is gray, so I'll add some, I'll keep a lot of it light like the paper, and I'll add a little bit of gray and even some blue undertones, and just trying to really not change the coloring of his beard or part of his eyebrows so much. And now I'm just bringing in those darker shadows, preserving the color of the hat, which is going to be a brownish orange color to it, and just adding some of the darker browns in. And of course more color in on his robe. Really light colors. You can see the paper still coming through, and that's exactly what we want, because as I now start adding the dark green, we're going to keep adding that and just building those layers back in. At this stage, I'm really focusing on layering the undertones for the skin and the beard, and just using shades like burnt sienna, warm gray to add a natural feel, and keeping the pressure light throughout helps with blending later on. And just coming back in, and I was adding a little bit of graphite pencil there, and then over again with the light pink pencil. This part is a very light, it's basically a white colored pencil I'm placing in. Yes, the paper is pretty much the same color as the white colored pencil, but the colored pencil is going to help build up that waxiness to the paper and allow me to put some other layers into it. And it's already actually blended into the graphite pencil, which spreads that around. If you don't want that, remove more of your graphite pencil. But for this application, that was fine to have the graphite pencil blended in. That was the intention. And with many of the base layers in place, I'm going to start getting ready to build depth and shadow, and this is where the multiple layers really come into play. Just pressing slightly harder to increase pigment saturation, especially around the folds of his robe and the textures of his beard, but you'll see this mostly in the hat. This is still a light color I'm putting in. The intended color of this hat is going to be a brownish orange, but I'm laying the orange in now because that's going to be in part of the highlight, and it's also going to build those layers of depth underneath. And continuing to add those layers of colored pencils. You'll see as the pigment keeps laying down, each layer adding a little bit more depth to the color that we're looking for. And we'll be blending that out pretty soon with some odorless mineral spirits once we've got enough pigment really laid down on the paper. And we're just, in addition to adding this green into the jacket of Eldric, we're going to be putting in some light blue, just some turquoise colors, adding, again, that depth, those layers. It's not just going to be a straight ahead one color green. There's going to be a lot really making the fabric what it is. And just as he's telling that story, I want to emphasize that his mouth is open a bit and he's conveying one of his many tales and sharing his knowledge of stories. And adding in that dark brown underneath the rim of the hat. Continuing to add that, you want to push more of your darks to not a black, but just layers of color. Sometimes the really dark purples, the dark browns, those will really help in bringing realism to it. So in very few things in real life are true black. They're extremely dark gray, dark greens, dark purples. So we're going to try to avoid adding black almost anywhere. And you'll see we'll get quite a depth of light colors in colored pencil, going from the lightness of the paper all the way to these dark browns and maybe some deeper purples and very dark greens added in. And now we're going to be adding some of the odorless mineral spirits, which is from Gamblin. Gamsol is a thinner, and what it's doing basically is it's melting down some of the wax and releasing more of the pigment. So you're almost, for a moment, liquefying it. I use an extremely small amount of the mineral spirits. I don't want to saturate the paper. I just want to have enough on the brush to where it's going to release those pigments and it actually kind of melt that wax down. Once you've done this, do not try to put more colored pencil over it while it's damp before the mineral spirits have fully dried and cured in. It'll compress the fibers of the paper and that will be pretty much it for your layers. So once you do this part, once you put some odorless mineral spirits down, leave it for an hour, even more, just to make sure that there's no dampness at all in the paper when you come back to it. But once it has dried and evaporated out, you can start adding more colored pencil in. It'll look like a seamless moment on this video, right? You're going to see me going back over it. But this piece was done in several days, and anytime I added the odorless mineral spirits, I gave it at least an hour, and sometimes just went back to it the next day and added more colors on top of it. And then you can once again later add more of the odorless mineral spirits and keep building those layers in. That's one technique. That's a technique I've been using. You can also work colored pencil pieces without using any odorless mineral spirits. You'll find there are many ways to do it, and I'll try to demonstrate many different ones, even using different types of paper and some different colored pencil techniques. But for these and this look that we're going for, I'm going to show you exactly what I did to achieve this. And for the pages of this book, I didn't want it to look like a white brand new book. I wanted this to look like an old book that he's told many stories from, and so I was just putting a light cream color over those pages. There are some vague lines that you can see on the page and indicating near the spine the different pages fanning out. So I used graphite pencil for a lot of that in the initial sketch, but now I'm just adding some layers of color, just giving a little bit of an aged look by using the cream colors and the very light tans that I'll use pretty sparingly throughout. But just to give a sense of pages and a book cover, I'm adding a little bit more detail in here, a little bit more depth and a little bit more of the dark brown, just to try to give more of an indication of something that's more three-dimensional and has shadow and light. And I just continue pushing some of those darker tones in, And you can see as this high-speed tutorial is showing you how just not being too afraid to add some of these dark colors is really going to start to bring a little bit more realism. This is a whimsical, more fantasy type piece, but that doesn't mean it has to look like an outline of a cartoon. You can do that if you like, but I like to add just glimpses of something that's maybe a little more real, has a little bit more depth to it, and that's why I'm pushing some of these darker colors in and trying to get a broad spectrum. You want your light colors to stay very light, say for highlights or the shiny part of a belt buckle or part of his beard. And you want the dark areas, the ones in shadow, like this area near his sleeve, these creases in his jacket, you want those to have darkness to them. The picture would work without it. The illustration, I think, could be fine, but it won't have as much of that detail. And this is a fairly small piece, so you can only place so much detail in. The larger you go, this being 5 by 7 inch, if you did a 20 by 24 large scale piece, you could put a lot more depth and detail in, but we're going to add as much as we can in here, and now just pushing those darker colors into the hat, thinking that the light source is going to be hitting primarily the center of his hat. So if you think of this as a cone-shaped hat, the light's going to emanate mostly towards the front, and down towards the bottom and the edges I'm going to give a little bit more depth and detail, as maybe he's outside telling a story. For some of the elements of this illustration, we wanted Eldric's hat with its warm, earthy tones, and that was really a lot of fun to layer. And by alternating burnt ochre and raw umber, I was able to capture that well-worn, lived-in feel. For his eyes, I deepened the shadows with dark sepia to bring out a story, like a storytelling spark. After all, the eyes are what connect viewers to the character, so you do want his eyes, if they're excited, you want them larger. If they're focusing on something, you want your eyes to be a little bit more squinted, and you'll add maybe some lines and some character that way. And here's a couple of tips. For tip number 1, build depth with layers. One of the keys to bringing Eldric to life was layering the Caran Luminance colored pencils over the graphite sketch, and by gradually building up light layers, you can achieve richer tones and a more lifelike depth. And just be patient, that's essential. Don't rush the layers. And tip 2, blending with odorless mineral spirits. To soften and blend the colored pencil layers seamlessly, I used the odorless mineral spirit sparingly. A small stiff brush works best for this, and the spirits break down the pencil's wax binder, which allows the colors to blend smoothly and create a more painterly effect. And for tip number 3, contrast for character. Contrast is crucial for capturing Eldric's expressive face and whimsical details. Just make sure your eyes are truly dark, especially in the eyes, beard, hat shadows. This contrast helps to draw the viewer's focus and adds a bit of magic to the illustration. With the details complete, I step back to assess the overall contrast and balance. Adding a few final highlights and deepening shadows, it makes all the difference, giving Eldric that extra bit of character and charm. And as we wrap up, there he is, Eldric the Storyteller, and he's ready to share his tales. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more whimsical illustrations and art tutorials. I'll have prints of Eldric available in the section below, and check out the link in the descriptions. And thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. We have a lot more gnomes coming up.